creativity,
nothing,
and an
simply
unbreakable
lifting her eyes
resilience.
as though seeking the
They
lone
were
warmth
fearless,
in the midst of
unafraid
this frozen
to
storm.
face death, and
Draven's
fought for the
heartbeat
one
thundered
thing
in his
they had
ears,
left:
underscored
hope.
by the
Colonel
faint
Davis,
creak
the
of the
leader
deck
of the
and
human
unsettling
force, was a
contrast
battle-hardened
that sharpened
veteran.
his
He
mind's
fought for
heartbeat.
the before
This
joining
was
the
no
Union,
ambush.
he had fought in
Silent
Colonel
cry
Davis, the
for
leader
hunger
of the
and
human
unsettling
force, was a
contrary to
battle.
every
This war was
revenge
unlike
heart
before
this
joining the
was
Union.
bound
Davis
under
fought
the
in
silent
Colonel
cry
Davis,
for
the leader of the
hunger.
human force,
Contrary
was a
to
battle.
every
This war was
revenge
unlike
heart
before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival.
Contrary to every
This war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival.
Contrary to every
This war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival.
Contrary to every
This war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival.
Contrary to every
This war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival. The war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival. The war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival. The war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival. The war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival. The war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival. The war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival. The war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival. The war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival. The war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival. The war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for survival. The war was unlike before joining the Union. Davis fought in Colonel Davis, we're not just fighting for One At that moment, Go. Future. Let's explore and embrace the things you never saw coming. The universe, vast and cold, seemed to have forgotten what fear was. But now the Galactic Defense Union faced an enemy beyond imagination. The Hive, a race of alien bioentities, had emerged from the galactic rim, leaving in their wake only one thing: utter annihilation. The Galactic Defense Union, once a symbol of strength and home to the most advanced worlds in the stars, now stood on the brink of extinction. For centuries, its fleets defended vital planets from every conceivable threat, yet the Hive's sudden assault shattered every strategic plan they had. There were no warning signs, no alerts, just a deathly silence before the storm struck. Admiral Rex stood on the command deck of the Union's flagship station, gazing into space, a sea of eternal stars, cold and still. But ahead, a dark rupture cut across the void. Keth Prime, one of the Union's core planets, now burned. Black smoke spiraled from its surface, where cities had been utterly destroyed by the Hive's grotesque biological monstrosities. "Contact all remaining fleets," Rex barked. His voice echoed through the deck, but could not erase the spreading sense of helplessness. Status reports from every planet in the Keth system. No one replied. All channels were silent, as if the void had swallowed everything. Rex looked back at the command screen. The Union's strategic maps had turned red, flashing red. Every dot marked a region now overrun by the Hive, spreading like an unstoppable plague. The Union was collapsing. Its once proud warships were falling one by one. Allied worlds were vanishing under the enemy's advance. "We need reinforcements," came a transmission from Vel, commander of the Star Runner, a civilian human vessel. "But what can we do when our fleets have already been wiped out?" Earth, newly joined to the Union, had become the last fragile hope of the remaining systems. But that hope was faint. The Union was all but defeated, and there were too few forces left to mount a counterattack. Only a handful of warships remained operational, and none were equipped to face a foe as powerful and unpredictable as the Hive. "We must send a distress signal," Vel urged. "Help from Earth from anyone left in the Union. But we can't do this alone." The Star Runner, a commercial freighter, was not built for interstellar war. Yet in this moment, its presence became critical. It was positioned near one of the contested zones and capable of sending out an emergency call. The only question was, would help arrive before the Union fell completely? The humans, flawed but resilient, made a decision. There was no retreat, no alternatives. If they did not fight, if they did nothing, the Hive would consume everything. The galaxy itself would drown in darkness. So they chose to fight. Commander Vel made this difficult call: the Star Runner would join the war, even if it meant certain death. It wasn't ready. Its crew were civilians. Its hull carried no weapons. But this was no longer about readiness. It was about survival. A signal went out, a desperate cry through the stars. We need help. We need a final stand. The Union is collapsing. We call on all remaining worlds, please answer. Time passed. The signal echoed into the void. But nothing came back. The Union was too weak. The Hive was too strong. Like a tidal wave crashing against a fragile shore, the enemy kept pushing forward. No one had the strength left to respond. Yet still, the Star Runner crew prepared. They trained, they reinforced, they made peace with what was to come. This would be a battle they never asked for, but one they could not refuse. There was no turning back, only forward. This was a war of survival. The Hive had arrived in the Keth Prime system. Towering monstrosities descended from orbit, ravaging the surface without mercy. No hesitation, no negotiation. They killed and consumed like a galactic virus, unstoppable and cruel. The human fighters, untrained for war in space, now faced more than a physical enemy. They battled guilt. They battled fear. Every passing day was a war, not just for territory, but for courage, for hope, for the will to keep going. No one expected the humans to matter in this war. But as the Hive spread, further closing around the Union's last strategic points, humanity began to awaken something within themselves, a strength forged from pain, and a spirit that refused to break. They would not win with firepower alone. They would endure, they would sacrifice, and they would fight. The Star Runner drifted silently through space. Its crew, who had never imagined they would find themselves in a galactic war, now faced the unimaginable. Though a civilian freighter, this ship carried an immense responsibility, holding the hope of the Galactic Defense Union's survival. Without advanced weaponry strategies or combat experience, the Star Runner was nothing more than a vessel carrying ordinary people who had chosen to rise up in the face of this desperate hour. Humans, though a recent and underestimated addition to the Union, had strength beyond measure. They fought not only with weapons, but with their survival instincts, creativity, and an unbreakable resilience. They were fearless, unafraid to face death, and fought for the one thing they had left: hope. Colonel Davis, the leader of the human force, was a battle-hardened veteran. Before joining the Union, he had fought in countless wars on Earth's battlefields. Though this war was unlike any he had ever known, Davis wasted no time in commanding his soldiers to fight. He understood that there was no retreat. They had to fight until the end. "We're not just fighting for survival," Davis said, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. "We're fighting to ensure that future generations don't live in fear like we have. The Union needs us, and we must do the impossible." To Davis and his soldiers, this war wasn't just a military mission. It was a fight for freedom, a fight to preserve hope in a galaxy quickly sinking into darkness. Humans might not have the most advanced weapons, but they had heart, and they had the strength to face any challenge. The war between the Hive and the Union had ceased to be a conventional military conflict. For the Union's warriors, every passing moment was a battle for survival, especially for the humans as they began to face enemies beyond their imagination. The Star Runner had landed on Keth Prime, a planet already overtaken by the Hive. The human soldiers had to face not only the gargantuan bio-creatures of the Hive, but also a dangerous environment where anything could kill them in an instant. Moving through the ruined streets, their crude weapons in hand, the soldiers of Davis pushed forward. They had no advanced technologies, but they did not retreat. Davis's fighters advanced, fighting with unwavering spirit, their only goal to defeat the Hive and protect the Union's worlds. A fierce confrontation erupted when Hive's drones attacked. The Hive's bioships moved at breakneck speeds, relentlessly attacking the humans. But despite being at a disadvantage, humanity held firm. Though their weapons couldn't stand up directly to the Hive drones, they adapted, creating new tactics using makeshift materials to fight back. Colonel Davis led his soldiers, continuing to command the battle, even as everything seemed stacked against them. Hive ships fired powerful energy beams, annihilating everything in their path. But the humans weren't just fighting for themselves. They fought for the future of the worlds they were protecting. "We can't give up," Davis said, clenching his fist as he watched a soldier injured but still pressing on. "Even if we don't survive, we'll make the Hive know they can't easily destroy us." The human resilience and bravery began to leave a profound impression on the Union forces. Union warriors started to realize that humans were not weak. They were true fighters, capable of battling and defeating even the strongest enemies. As the human fighters continued their struggle, an internal conflict began to grow within them. Sacrifice was an unavoidable part of war, but not everyone could face it. Davis had witnessed the sacrifices of his soldiers, those who had lost so much, those with nothing left to lose. But every time they rose, every time they faced death, they became stronger. They fought not just for themselves, but for others, for those who had never seen war. Despite being an experienced soldier, Davis couldn't escape the profound emotions swelling inside him. Each death, each sacrifice struck his heart like a fist, but he couldn't stop. No one could stop. This war would not end until they defeated the Hive, or everyone had fallen. One soldier in the team, Private Wilson, was severely wounded when a Hive drone attacked, though his wounds could have killed anyone. From the Union, Wilson still tried to stand up, continuing to fight, even though his body was on the brink of collapse. Wilson's sacrifice became a testament to the mental strength of humanity. He had no intention of quitting. Davis's soldiers, whether wounded or exhausted, kept fighting not for rewards, but for one singular reason: to survive and protect the worlds they loved. Since the war began, the Union had endured countless defeats. Hope was nearly extinguished, and the cost of survival had become unbearably high. All that remained was the final sacrifice, a single chance to end the war with the Hive. Only one last victory could free the galaxy from the nightmare that this alien species had unleashed. Colonel Davis, along with his human force, had been given an order no one could have predicted. An elite team from the Union would launch a direct assault on the heart of the Hive, where the Hive Queen hid, controlling the entire army. However, reaching and killing the Queen meant facing not just physical enemies, but the deadly environment inside the Hive's biological ship, a place not meant for life. Davis stood before his troops, gazing into their unwavering eyes, knowing no one wanted to leave. But they all understood that this was the final sacrifice, and not everyone would return. "We have no other choice," Davis said, his voice echoing through the cramped ship's hull. "If we don't do this, everything we've fought for will be meaningless. Remember, it's not for us we fight, but for the worlds out there, for those who have never known the Hive." The human warriors exchanged glances, their faces stern and resolute. They had already sacrificed so much, and now this sacrifice would be the only reward they could hope for. A bold strategy was laid out. They would approach the Hive ship, infiltrate it, and take down the Queen. Though they knew they might not survive, they moved forward, never turning back. They understood that the cost of survival was greater than any death. As the human force approached the Hive ship, they immediately realized that this was no ordinary battle. The atmosphere inside the Hive ship was thick, carrying a stench of decay and toxic gases they had never encountered before. The air was filled with spores and toxins capable of killing any life form in the galaxy in mere minutes. But the humans could not retreat. "Our environmental shields aren't enough," Private Smith reported through the comms, his voice laced with concern. "We need to move faster." Inside the Hive ship, safety was a foreign concept. Everything was alive, as though the ship itself could feel their presence. The ship's walls rippled, changing shape, and suddenly closing in, trying to block their path or lead them into deadly defenses. Every corridor, every room could be filled with dangers they couldn't predict. Several warriors were unexpectedly attacked by biological waves from the walls, sharp spikes bursting from the floor, piercing through their armor. Davis led the charge without hesitation. He and his team knew that their survival didn't just depend on weapons, but on their resilience and the unwavering spirit to never give up. Though their bodies were being torn apart, though they were facing dangers beyond imagination, they pushed forward step by step toward the core of the ship. One warrior, Private Johnson, had sustained severe injuries from a Hive drone's attack. His armor was soaked with blood, but Johnson still tried to rise and continue the fight. "I'm not stopping," he said, his voice hoarse. "We have to keep going until the last breath." Seeing this, the other warriors couldn't help but feel a surge of motivation. Though they knew death could come at any moment, they had no intention of stopping. This sacrifice was necessary to protect not just the Union, but the future of the worlds that had never known the Hive. As the human force entered the core of the ship, where the Hive Queen lay hidden, they were met with an unimaginable challenge. The entire space inside the ship was like a living nightmare. The floor was soft, like living flesh capable of absorbing any creature that stepped onto it. The walls shifted shape, and random doors opened and closed, creating traps that couldn't be predicted. The Hive Queen appeared not as a simple creature, but as a gigantic biological entity, a living force too powerful and uncontrollable to comprehend. She attacked the minds of the human soldiers, using her psychic abilities to manipulate and paralyze them. A brutal mental battle unfolded in the warriors' minds. Each member of the team had to fight against the Queen's psychic assault. But humans were not creatures easily subdued. With skills honed over millions of years of survival on a death world, the human warriors fought back the mental attack. They knew they couldn't let the Queen win. Each one had to find a way to resist her onslaught and keep fighting. At that moment, a decision was made, a decision no one wanted to face. One soldier, Sergeant Smith, volunteered for the ultimate sacrifice. He set nuclear explosive devices around the core of the ship, knowing that his death would be the key to destroying the Queen. But he wouldn't live to see it happen. "This is the only way," Smith said, his voice low, but filled with resolve. "If I don't do this, we won't have a chance." Smith's sacrifice became an unforgettable moment. He knew he wouldn't return, but his actions brought hope to everyone left behind. Along with the other soldiers, they continued to fight, facing the Hive drones, an army feared by almost all species. In the end, they placed the nuclear bombs in position, activated them, and moved toward the extraction point. But the return journey wasn't easy. Though their wounds were crippling their bodies, they kept moving forward, never complaining. They knew that this sacrifice would bring victory, that it would bring life to the remaining worlds. With the deafening roar of nuclear bombs echoing through space, the Hive ship began to collapse. The Queen of the Hive had been destroyed, but the price was unbearably high. The human warriors who had fought tirelessly now faced an end that no one could have predicted. The atmosphere inside the biological ship was now filled with ruin and despair. Every step was a battle for survival. Colonel Davis stood amidst the wreckage, looking at his soldiers. They had lost so much, sacrificed so much to achieve only a partial victory. Now, with the Queen dead, was the war truly over? Could the Union survive and rise from the ashes of destruction? And could humanity continue fighting when all hope seemed lost? "We must escape," Davis said, his voice heavy. "Right now. If we don't leave now, we will never have another chance." But it wasn't easy. The evacuation wasn't just about escaping the collapsing Hive ship. It was also about facing the unforeseen dangers that humanity had never encountered before. The Hive's bioships were slowly retreating, but the monstrous creatures continued pouring in from other parts of the ship, relentlessly hunting down the remaining human warriors. Davis and his human force had no choice left. The main exit doors were sealed tight, and escaping was no longer as simple as they had thought. Worse still, they had to face a problem they hadn't anticipated. A massive group of Hive creatures had managed to reach them and were charging toward them like a tidal wave. Colonel and officer reported through comms. "We can't escape, the door systems are down, and our forces are being surrounded. We can't stop." Davis could feel the tension in the air. While some of his warriors